Hello, welcome back to Becky Bakes. Today I'm going to make a jalousie. Now that translates as louvered window that was typically put into metal window frames in the sort of 30s and 40s, and it was controlled with a sliding handle. And this looks a little bit like that when it's cooked, but you'll see what I mean. So jalousie. So this involves a packet of puff pastry, and for the filling we're going to use some apples, and I've got two quite small cooking apples that are Bramleys. And when you cook them, they just collapse into a mush. And in order to get a little bit more appley texture, I'm going to use an eating apple as well. So these have got to be peeled, cored and chopped and then put into a saucepan. Now remember to use a bridge, put your knife between, cut down, and then lay them cut side down so that they don't wobble off, and it also stops them going brown as well. And then another bridge to cut it into quarters. And then you're going to peel it. So underneath where the flour was first, and then down towards the centre, then under where the stalk was and down to meet where you just cut. Pop it out and then take off a thin layer of the skin, and all this can go on the compost heap if you've got one. And then you want it in little chunks, so I would do a bridge again and I would cut twice and then hold them together and cut across and make probably a dozen or 15 little pieces, and then that goes straight in your saucepan, and then you've just got to do all the rest. Right, there we are, we've got our apples in the saucepan. Now if your Bramleys are enormous, you probably won't need two very big ones. I think mine are quite young and they're not terribly big, so two smallish Bramleys and an eating apple. To that I'm going to add just a tablespoon of water so that it doesn't burn in the pan, and that's going to go on, and they will probably take 3 to 4 minutes once it's boiled, and you'll see that they just collapse and go into a mush, and hopefully we'll have a few lumps from the eating apple.
Five minutes later.
Now those came to the boil and they've simmered for about 3 minutes, and you can see that the Bramleys have turned to a lovely soft texture, and we've still got nice pieces of the other apple, so it's not going to be too sloppy, and it's reduced a lot, so that's perfect. Now we need to add something to make it taste interesting, and at this point you could stir in some mixed fruit. You could put in some cinnamon, probably half a teaspoon of cinnamon or a handful of fruit. If you've got raspberries in the fridge, you can throw in a handful of raspberries, some chopped up strawberries or some blueberries, and I've got a nectarine, so I'm going to put in some slices of nectarine. And it's a great way of using up your fruit if it's just slightly ripe, getting a bit too ripe. So I'll get that sliced, and then I'll just see if I can get this stirred out. There we are. And put that in with some sugar. It's a very good idea to taste your stewed apple and see how sour it is, because I am renowned for not putting in an awful lot of sugar. So I'll start with a tablespoon and give it a stir, and then I'm going to taste it because I don't want to get in trouble. So let's see. Oh gosh, it needs a bit more. I think that's going to be enough though. Right, so we'll just leave that to cool, and I'm going to just drop in the nectarine. Right, so I've got a packet of ordinary puff pastry, but you can use gluten-free, it's perfectly good. And we need to get this unpacked. It's often quite sticky, so just be careful how you unroll it, and have some flour ready as well, because sometimes the top of it can be really sticky. So here's my tray, And I need to cut this in half with a knife. And I'm going to just guess where halfway is. Doesn't matter if it's not absolutely accurate. So that's more or less in half. And one of the halves goes straight onto the baking tray. And I've put some paper on there so that it won't stick. There we are. So that's resting on a piece of silicone, because if the fruit comes out and burns on the tray, it's quite a mess to get clean. So it's always a good idea to line your tray for things like this. The other piece of pastry you're going to cut. So I would put a little bit of flour on it so that when you fold it over, it doesn't stick to itself. So now we fold it in half. Like that. And we take our sharp knife. I'm going to have to turn it round though, because I'm right-handed and I need to cut where the fold is. And you need a border, an imaginary border when you start to cut. So you make your first cut, and that's the top of the border. You can see that's quite sticky, so I'm going to put some flour on my knife. And then you cut again. You try and cut them straight, and roughly, what's that, I don't know, about 1.5 centimetres apart, all the way down to the bottom. But remember to leave your border at the bottom. So I'm going to stop there. And now we've got that ready, so we can put the fruit onto the pastry. So you've jazzed up your apple with something interesting, and that goes down the middle of the pastry. Because it's hot, it may start to melt the pastry a little bit, so you've got to be a bit quick with this. And try and keep it so that you've got a border that you can use for attaching the top layer. Right, so there's my fruit. I'm now going to wet the edge of the base. And this will make the two layers stick together. And if any of your fruit is too close to the edge, this is the point at which you can give it a bit of a push with your brush and make it go where you want it to be. Now, I'm going to bring that nearer to me so that I can lift the top over. So this is where it gets a little bit fiddly. Pick up your lid. And there you have what looks a little bit like a louvered window. So you've got to seal the edges, press them down, maybe a bit of flour on your fingers. And then to neaten them up, you can use this device where you have a finger and a thumb and then another finger in between. So you put your finger and thumb on the pastry and pull the other bit in between. So hold it down with your finger and thumb and then pull it between your finger and thumb towards the jalousie. And you see that if you had a wobbly edge, if your pastry wasn't quite lined up, that all just gets hidden now. And you get this rather nice effect around the edge of the pastry. So that goes in the oven, number 6, for 15-20 minutes. You've got to make sure it really is cooked underneath. You don't want a soggy bottom. So we'll get that in. Now this has actually taken a bit longer this morning, nearer to 20 minutes, but you can see that it's very well risen, nice and brown. And although it's difficult to get that top layer on, if you spend a minute or two just sorting out the strips of pastry, you can see that actually it finishes up looking great because it rises and takes out all the sort of imperfections. So I'm going to take it across to the work surface and finish it off, and I think that looks okay. Now you're going to need something that's quite large to serve this on, and I've used the upside down breadboard, and I used 2 fish slices, one at either end, to get it off the baking tray and onto the board. The next thing to do is give it a sprinkling of icing sugar with my little sieve, just to make it look lovely. And this is very crispy on the day you make it. The next day it will go a bit soft, but if you want it crispy and hot, put it back in the oven and it will re-crisp. But I think you might quite enjoy this. Have a go. Take a photo and send it to us. And if you like, share and then subscribe, you'll get to see what's coming next. There we are. Bye.